We're going to resume with our Cold War lectures. Today we're going to talk about the division of Germany. After World War II, Germany was divided by Great Britain, France, the United States, and the Soviet Union. Those four people divided Germany into occupation zones. Those are places that were occupied by different people that were, in some respects, different nationalities or ethnicities. Each nation was supposed to run its zone until free elections could be held to help develop the democracy that we wanted. Berlin, the capital of Germany, located in the Soviet zone, or East Germany, also divided into zones by Great Britain, France, the US, and USSR, or Russia. Conflict over Germany. US and Soviets disagreed about reunited Germany. This was an issue that had been going on for many, many years in the Cold War, and it actually one of the most significant turning points in the Cold War was later in history with Mikhail Gorbachev and Ronald Reagan in a discussion about the division of Germany. President Truman wanted to reunite Germany and allow free elections because, again, we wanted democracy, whereas that's not what was ideal for the Soviets. The Soviets wanted to have a more communist type of government. British, French, and American zones united to form West Germany. That just left the East Germans area, which was controlled by the Soviets. Included West Berlin, even though it was located in East Germany. Stalin feared united Germany could attack the USSR, so he wanted to make sure that he kept his enemy small. He didn't want them to be able to grow, which is one of the things we talked about since we started talking about conflicts. The Soviets refused to allow their zone to become part of a united Germany. Again, this meant that they would have a stronger military if they united them all together. So the Soviets blocked that idea because that would give them more potential to rise up against the Soviets. Soviet zone became East Germany, which included East Berlin. Berlin. There was a blockade in Berlin. One of your vocabulary words. Soviet blockade of West Berlin in an effort to end plans to unify Germany. They didn't want anyone getting in or out of West Berlin, so they blocked off the entrances and the exits, used military forces, and controlled it that way. The Berlin airlift. Airplanes were used by Allies to deliver food and supplies to West Berlin. This was the area that was under the Soviet-controlled map, but not under Soviet control. This was the area that the Allies were supposed to have control over, but couldn't get things to because they couldn't go through East Berlin to get there. Soviets eventually lifted the blockade, which allowed people to get in and out, and the Berlin Wall was built. It was built around West Berlin by the communists. This was an effort to keep people from communist East Germany from leaving, because not everybody likes communism. The government does, but not the people that it quote unquote serves. Anyone who tried to climb over the wall was shot, resulting in a lot of deaths, and became a symbol of division between communist and anti-communist nations of the world. This is where we'll get into Mikhail Gorbachev and President Ronald Reagan, because it has to do with the Berlin Wall. The Cold War heats up. Now that's a pretty unique term, and we're going to discuss why the Cold War heats up. Why does something that we refer to as cold ever heat up? Well, because the U.S. decided we're going to start to fight communism. First plan is we're going to fight containment. The plan to stop the spread of communism. We're going to use containment as our tool. We're going to keep them from moving out just as they kept us from moving in. So, in a matter of speaking, we flipped the table on them because they wanted us not to be able to get into East Berlin, and we wanted them to not get out of West Berlin. The Truman Doctrine, U.S. policy to help weaker nations prevent communist takeovers. He vowed his assistance to help the spread of democracy. Money and weapons were given to countries that were fighting against communist rebels. Examples of this are Greece and Turkey. That's just two examples. There's many, many more that we'll probably get a chance to talk about briefly. Introduced containment policy. The Marshall Plan, U.S. policy plan to give aid to nations of Western Europe to prevent communist takeovers. We wanted people to work as hard as they could to keep the communist governments from spreading. This is what we talked about with imperialism. If it was allowed, then these communist nations would expand, which would give them more land, more soldiers, more power. Gave $13 billion to help rebuild economies damaged by World War II, and Western Europeans were no longer desperate, and most were interested in weren't interested in turning to communism. These individuals decided that communism was not the way that they wanted to go. They decided that they would prefer to be a democratic society because of what they've seen as a result of the Allied forces being there, and what they were seeing as a result of communism being there, and which one they liked better, basically. North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO. NATO, anti-communist military alliance created to protect member nations from threats by communist forces. Basically, this group was established so that we wouldn't have a major communist uprising. Led by the United Nations, and is really still led by the United States, excuse me, not United Nations. Included anti-communist nations from all over the world, because we figured the only way to battle against communism was to band together and have our strength in numbers. Help fight the spread of communism again with stronger forces. The Warsaw Pact. This was the answer by communists to NATO. The Warsaw Pact, communist military alliance, is created to protect member nations from anti-communist forces. So this was their way of keeping communism alive and keeping those of us who didn't believe in communism from stepping into their arena and taking over their platforms on communism with anti-communist knowledge and sentiments, trying to get them to understand that communist was not as glorious as it was being made to be. Created in response to the creation of NATO, led by the Soviet Union, included communist nations from Central and Eastern Europe. This is a world divided. We'll talk more about this when we get to class, but you can see the different colors. They represent NATO, other allies of the United States, the Warsaw Pact, socialist countries aligned with the USSR or Soviet Union, others allied with the USSR, non-aligned nations, communist guerrilla nations, and anti-communist guerrillas. And we'll talk about guerrillas and what they really are, because they're a military force. The spread of communism. Communism spreads to China, ruled by a Nationalist Party, KMT. China during World War II, led by Chiang Kai-shek, anti-communist ally of the United States. Communist Revolution. Communist rebels fight nationalists for power. Nationalists flee to Taiwan. Communists take control of China. People's Republic of China is established. Mao Zedong becomes a dictator, who we'll talk about quite a bit when we start talking about war during the Cold War. So in essence, what we have is we have China during World War II, who was led by the Nationalist Party, that and that they were an anti-communist ally of the United States. But with the Communist Revolution, communist rebels fought for national power. Remember, national power is where someone believes in nationalism, that their country is greater than everything. And the nationalists actually flee to Taiwan, and communists take control of China in 1949. Communist China. Great Leap Forward in 1958, Chairman Mao's, which is Mao Zedong's 5-year economic plan to modernize China. Mao had some good ideas. He wanted to make China a better place. However, just didn't go about it quite the right way. Rapid shift from farming to industry. Privately owned farms were seized and combined to form large government-run farms. We've talked about how the government in communism, they control and own everything. They are not allowed to have any private property or personal property. It's all government-owned, government-run. You do with it what the government tells you to do. Many peasants were taken from farms and forced to work in factories. These people had no knowledge of how to do this. All they knew was farming. They had to be taught, and a lot of times it resulted in their injuries because they didn't know how to operate the equipment that they were being forced to use. Very harsh treatment of those who resisted. The results: production of low quality manufactured goods. That's not still the case, really. It's a lot better quality stuff being produced in China, but at the same time, they're still not as quality made, I believe, as those items made in the U.S. But again, we talk about production in the U.S., we talk about higher expenses. So we talk about a higher price for goods. Food shortages, 15 to 20 million people died of starvation. They were so controlling that not everyone got the food they needed. They had to take what was given to them. Many Chinese began rebelling against Mao's harsh form of communism. They wanted to have more of a democracy, or I guess another way of saying it is probably a more relaxed dictatorship, because they would have lived with dictators. They just didn't want to have one that was so controlling, which we know that that's what dictators do. They control things their way. Communist China continued. Cultural Revolution, 66 to 76. Chairman Mao's efforts to increase control of China and create a more pure communist state. Red Guards, gangs of young people ordered by Chairman Mao to destroy old ideas and attack anyone who opposed communist views. This is not uncommon. We've talked about this. Anytime that there's an idea that goes against what's being taught or what the idea of the leader is, then they are being silenced about it. Mao's enemies were purged from Communist Party, led to years of chaos because they were still fighting. We're going to stop here with Korea. We'll take up Korea on our next lesson.